Hello and welcome to this training for the proposed framework that has been developed in the HEU-EFS project for pilot use cases. My name is Alexandra Paulson and I'm a Senior Advisor with the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. So in the proposed framework, we have identified two phases, the pre-submission phase and the submission review phase. And in the pre-submission phase, the first starting point is the contact point. So early on in the process, to allow for planning and research allocation at the competent authority that you have identified for where you want to conduct your early feasibility study, and then the early dialogue between the sponsor and the competent authority, and where appropriate, other available or relevant parties like the ethics committee, experts from the competent authority, and the principal investigator of the clinical site if that has already been identified. In addition, if the study is to be conducted in more than one member state, then other competent authorities could also optionally be invited. The submission, validation and review are set out by MDR Article 70, but here our proposal is to reduce the timeline by 30%, and I'll go into this in more detail in the following slides. But basically by reducing some of the time for both the assessment time and the time given for responding to requests for more information, and the same in the review phase. So in more detail, the contact point is to notify and inform the applicable authorities and the competent authority and the ethics committee of the upcoming EFS and the intent that you wish to undergo the accelerated process. And the notification is intended to be simple. It alerts the competent authority of incoming application, identifies key principles with the device technology, outlines the qualifications for accelerated review. And the idea here is that it shouldn't take more than 1 to 2 weeks to get a response, because the response you are requiring from the competent authority is purely that they have received your email. So in the email, we expect that you justify why you believe you qualify for the accelerated process and that you are an early feasibility study. So unmet need, breakthrough device, anatomical understanding, new extended use, the risk class of the device, the patient population that you've identified, and the applicable ISO standards, like, for example, ISO 14155, and those as device-specific standards that you may have used for your preclinical testing. And so, in addition, you as a sponsor, your plan and timing for when you want to submit, but also if you want to have an early dialogue. And from all the work we've been doing to date, we highly recommend the early dialogue. And so here is listed a short checklist of readiness for early feasibility, and it provides the competent authority a bit of understanding about you as a sponsor. So your QMS certificate, if your team or company have a history of conducting early feasibility studies, declaration that the early feasibility study is not the sole clinical investigation to support a conformity assessment, information on the EFS approval and status if you're conducting early feasibility studies in other jurisdictions, where applicable, and as per the guidance that's recently been published, the breakthrough designation if you have that, data safety monitoring board, charter and plan, and patient protection measures. And so the goal with the contact point is purely to notify the competent authority that you have an EFS that you plan to submit to them and the timeline for this. And the response from the competent authority is just to say that they've received this, but because you've given them a timeline, it may allow them to bring in, if they need, clinical experts. So the second part of the pre-submission phase is then the ILE dialogue. And so, as we state here, it's optional, but it is highly recommended. All the competent authorities that we've spoken to say that it improves the submission file that they receive. So it's an opportunity to have a targeted discussion related to the device, population, the clinical investigation plan. The pre-submission should include the appropriate background, and here, high level detail, similar to the contact point, but the synopsis of the early feasibility study based on Appendix A of MDCG guidance. The 2024-3, including purpose, endpoints, outcomes, follow-up, and oversight, and questions with background details that you have for the competent authority. And if you've identified that there's the chance that you may, with these devices that are in early development, have identified certain things may change, to make this clear to the competent authority and indicate the timing for the submission. And the goal here, of course, is to allow detailed discussion on the study and clarify any issues before the submission. So then we come to the submission phase, which starts with the validation and then moves to the review. And on the left-hand side here, you can see the timings of MDR, and on the right-hand side, you can see the timings that we're proposing that are slightly shortened. And so you can see here, we're looking at reducing the maximum of 55 days to 39 days. And so this is done by the competent authority validation phase being reduced by a maximum of 3 days on either side here. And so this is because, of course, you've been in touch with your competent authority as a sponsor, and they know about the device, they know the plan for the early feasibility study to a certain extent, and they may have already, if they need external experts, have lined them up with the timing of your submission. So these things would then be able to be moved forward more quickly. And so if there are any gaps identified, there's requests for more information, then we have proposed here a reduced time. So here it's important to understand that you as a sponsor have requested to have an accelerated process, and therefore you have to be ready to respond more quickly. And so we have kept the final decision phase to the same time. And then in the review phase, you can see here we've reduced to the minimum amount of MDR. But here again, we believe, because of all the process that has been in the pre-submission phase and then the validation phase, that it's possible to accelerate here. And if there's any deficiencies, what we're suggesting here is that a competent authority could have a rolling review where they interactively approach you with any questions, or they have a stop clock where if they identify issues or questions, they stop the clock on their review and it moves to the sponsor. And here as well, you see we've reduced the MDR doesn't give a set timeline here, but here we've reduced it to 7 to 17 days. And we also open for approval with conditions. And this is especially to do with early feasibility studies. These are small studies where the device may be going into humans for the first time. And so a competent authority might say, okay, well, you can implant in the first patient, and then we'll see how that goes, and then we will approve for more patients after that. And this is from our understanding from the competent authorities as well, this is an approach that they have used previously. And then again here, the sponsors should respond to any requests for more information in a rapid way. And the final decision by the NCA to approve or not approve utilises the rest of the clock with a maximum of 45 days. So going into a bit more detail around submission, the evidence should be appropriate for the intended use of the device for the stage of the development, and EFS is done early in the development. And it should take into account the specificity of EFS. So, for example, that it is a small-scale study and it is not intended for the conformity assessment. And it needs to, of course, include the required documentation from Annex 15 of the MDR and follow the provisions of relevant guidances. So, for example, MDCG guidance 2021-8 and 2024-5, and especially the checklist in Appendix A, we suggest would be very useful. And then why you believe that you qualify for the accelerated review. And it is important that before you submit, of course, I think even before you have the early dialogue meeting, it's important to review any national details that are available from the competent authority or the ethics committee's websites, if there are any national requirements that need to be met. And always ensure the application and submission deliverables are clear. And then specifically, because this is an early feasibility study, it's early in the development of the device. The design may not be completely set. The study may be in order to set the design properly. And so modifications to the investigational device, you can make this clear in the application. And this may have a consequence on the study procedure, the clinical investigation plan, or the informed consent. And to allow for continued learnings, changes have to be supported by the evidence and consistent with the original application. And justifications for support the change have to be maintained by the study sponsor and have to take into account benefit-risk ratio for the patient. It shouldn't negatively impact safety and performance. And a more conservative approach for implementing changes may be needed. And to expedite any changes, it is very important to have an open dialogue with the competent authority and, where necessary, the ethics committee. And if there are pre-identified changes, this should be articulated to the competent authority and the ethics committee in the pre-submission phase. So, if there are deficiencies in the communication, so if the sponsor isn't able to respond within the time set that we identified for the accelerated process, then the submission will revert to the MDR Article 70 process. Because if you, as a sponsor, aren't able to meet the accelerated process requirements, if you need longer time, then we can't put more pressure on the competent authority to try and achieve it within this accelerated timeline. So then it reverts to the normal Article 70 timeline. So thank you for your attention, and please use our website to find more information if needed, or please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you.